Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war in Gaza is a long way from over. Just days after the U.S. Secretary of State told Israel to lower the intensity of its strikes, Netanyahu told troops in Gaza that the war against Hamas would only intensify. Hamas is viewed as a terrorist organization by multiple countries. Netanyahu's visit comes after the Israeli military killed more than 70 Palestinians in an airstrike on a refugee camp in central Gaza.
Christmas Day in central Gaza. This man says he did everything for his son, but in the end, he couldn't save him. In his desperation, he asks to be buried with him. Palestinians are mourning the dozens killed at Maghazi refugee camp at mass funerals, following one of the deadliest nights in the Strip.
My entire family is gone. All 5 of my brothers are gone. They didn't even leave me one brother, not one brother.
While Israel has intensified its strikes, the Gaza Health Ministry says the Palestinian death toll has surpassed 20,000. This phase in fighting is also one of the deadliest for Israeli troops, increasing the pressure on their government. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited soldiers in Gaza, assuring them the offensive would continue until victory. He also addressed Parliament, vowing to bring hostages home, but saying more time was needed. A day after the military said it found the bodies of 5 Israeli captives inside a Hamas tunnel.
And we won't be able to release all the hostages without military pressure. Military pressure, operational pressure, political pressure. And therefore, one thing we wouldn't do, we will not stop fighting.
But pressure is mounting on Netanyahu. Families of hostages interrupted his speech, chanting, "Now." They have already been waiting for the return of their loved ones for 80 days.
Let's bring in our correspondent Jan-Philip Schultz here. He's in Jerusalem. Jan-Philip, Netanyahu has spoken to Israeli troops in Gaza and addressed Parliament. He says Israel will intensify the fighting. How are people there reacting to the Prime Minister's comments?
Yes, exactly. Netanyahu didn't only say that there will be no stop in the fighting, but that he even wants to intensify the fighting. As we could see, even during the speech in the Knesset, he was already interrupted by family members of the hostages. They say they don't understand how this strategy helps them, and they demand immediate political action to bring the hostages home. And little surprisingly, the speech was also criticized by the Israeli opposition, by parts of the Israeli society, and by many international humanitarian organizations. But once again, Netanyahu seems unimpressed by the domestic pressure and also by the mounting regional and international pressure.
You mentioned that the families of the hostages are not satisfied with the way that Netanyahu has been dealing with this situation. What did those families of the hostages expect, Jan-Philip?
Well, I've spoken to many family members of the hostages in the past days, and they are very unified in their disappointment with the Netanyahu government and in their demand that there has to be immediate action to bring the hostages home now. But my impression is also that when it comes to concrete steps, how to get there, they don't always have this unified voice, especially when it comes to the question of a lasting ceasefire and the conditions how to achieve this. But there seems to be some common ground, at least, that there has to be some kind of a new deal, probably similar to the deal we saw some weeks ago, that a temporary truce goes hand in hand with the release of hostages.
Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has himself outlined his conditions for peace. Tell us more about that.
Yes, we could read it in an article in the Wall Street Journal where he outlined his ideas. He stressed once again that Israel will not stop the fighting until the complete destruction of the Hamas terrorists. And he also said there has to be a complete demilitarization of Gaza and a de-radicalization of the Palestinian society. Especially the demand of a de-radicalization, of course, leaves a lot of room for interpretation, and it also shows that we are not talking about short or medium-term military goals there. And what is also quite interesting is that he distanced himself once again from plans that the United States have regarding the possible future in Gaza. He stressed that Israel needs to maintain what he says security responsibility of the Gaza Strip.
Talking about Gaza, the UN Security Council passed a resolution on Gaza last week. What impact has that had, if any, Jan-Philipp?
I would say the impact is close to zero. As you know, the resolution didn't ask for a ceasefire, but for steps to allow a better humanitarian care of the Gaza Strip, and we haven't seen any improvement there. Quite the contrary, the humanitarian situation is worse than ever before.
Jan-Philipp, thank you very much. That was DW's Jan-Philipp Schultz there in Jerusalem.
And journalist Sami Sokol in Jerusalem has more on how Netanyahu's special address to parliament was received after he had vowed to intensify fighting.
Well, this special session was called upon by the opposition. Yair Lapid, who is the head of the opposition, he said that Israel should prioritize the release of the hostages in the Gaza Strip, and at the same time, the family members of those who are held hostage were shouting. They were saying, now, meaning release them all now. And this is the response to the government that has put the question of hostages as one of the various different objectives of this military campaign, and has not put it as the first and foremost target.
So, I want to ask you, U.S. officials have repeatedly said they want Israel to move to a lower intensity phase of the war in Gaza. Is Netanyahu ignoring warnings from Israel's strongest ally?
Well, in Israel, they're talking about entering a new phase that will take maybe sometime at the end of January. In any case, the phase that we are now in, phase 2, which is the most extensive phase, which includes both the air campaign and at the same time a ground force campaign in Gaza and in Khan Yunis area. This we should expect to continue, and as Netanyahu said, should intensify, especially in the area of Khan Yunis, where they see that they expect to find the military leadership of Hamas.
And so, just to be clear, you think Israel will have full U.S. support for this phase? Well,
the President Biden did not say that he called on a ceasefire, and also when the Defense Secretary Austin was here in Tel Aviv, he also said that he would not tell Israel how to wage the war against Hamas. And at the same time, they're continuing with the sending of munitions. They said that they would give some advice as to, especially in terms of bringing in the aid into the Gaza Strip. That is something that they said that Israel should do more, and they should avoid the killing of civilians. But there might be differences of opinion. This doesn't mean that America will not continue backing Israel, even if some of these things cause the Americans some embarrassment.
Sami, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That's journalist Sami Sokol in Jerusalem.
Pope Francis has called for an end to the wars in Gaza and Ukraine. The leader of the Roman Catholic Church used his Christmas Urbi et Orbi message to appeal for peace. He also slammed the weapons industry, which he said was fueling conflict around the world.
In his Christmas address, Pope Francis lamented armed conflicts around the globe. He called for peace for the people of Ukraine, as well as a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel.
May there be an end to the fueling of violence and hatred, and may the Palestinian question be resolved.
The Pope had already condemned the failed logic of war during his Christmas Eve Mass, calling it contrary to the message of peace at Christmas. In this address, he said the poor desperately needed the money being spent on weapons. Then he delivered the Orbi et Orbi blessing.
Et benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, descenda super vos, et maniat semper.
Amen.